Morning, everybody. Happy, it's an inset day. They're not going back to school. Marvellous. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist and associate editor, Kevin Maguire. Good morning, Kevin.
Morning, Foxy.
Yes, Netflix has been taking a hammering for the last few weeks in this house. Right, this is the People's Pay-Per-View. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to demand your own bake a day, see how far you get with that. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an investigation into illegal vapes being sold to a 13-year-old child in evidence of a widespread failure to stop children getting addicted to nicotine, which is what the law is supposed to be doing. More on that later. But first, I want to take you to page 2, where it's reported, Kevin, that the nurses might be planning what they're calling a mega strike. Now, what is that? Is Godzilla involved or something?
Yeah, it would involve nurses in areas such as accident emergency, cancer care, striking. The unions have been very careful who they've pulled out. It's been very partial. It's not been everybody in hospitals, because we've now got this really messy situation where Unison, one of the big unions, probably most healthcare workers, voted to accept the government's offer, but the Royal College of Nursing rejected it, overturned their leaders who said it was the best they could get through negotiations. So the RCN has to decide what to do next, and it's not easy. I used to cover the world of work for various newspapers, and once the members overturn the recommendation of their professional negotiators, it's very hard to get a significant improvement in an offer. So Pat Cullen, who was saying as the RCN General Secretary, accept the offer. It's not great. They're not pretending that, but they think it's the best they can get. Now has to talk up the threat of further industrial action. We've been talking about all the way to winter. But they've got to reballot the RCN under employment law. Some would call it anti-trade union law. You've got to reballot every 6 months in a dispute. And it may be that she's talking up, look, we're really going to have to pull out all the stops and intensify industrial action to get anywhere, in order to get some way for us to think, do we want to carry on this dispute? Pat Cullen would deny that, but I've known trade union leaders to do it in the past.
Really? So you're suggesting that she's almost trying to scare the nurses into taking the offer because they don't?
Yeah, she'd absolutely deny that, but I wonder if there's a bit of that, because she will know you're not going to get anywhere if you just carry on as you are. It's bad for patients, of course. There's been more than 500,000 operations and appointments cancelled during the doctors' strikes, during the nurses' strikes, the ambulance dispute. It's also bad for the Tory government, which is not running the country very well. This is one of many, many mounting problems. And I think ministers can't just blame workers, because you see the level of public support is incredible in this dispute. 67% of people, including some who've been directly affected, having their operations, their appointments, their care disrupted or cancelled, still support the nurses. They're not backing Stephen Barclay. Where is he? The health secretary is like a Scarlet Pimpernel. He'll pop up now and again and do a little pre-prepared statement for the TV stations, what they call a pool clip, But he very rarely pops up to be grilled on the detail of this dispute and his offer, which let's be honest, would still mean a pay cut in real terms, living standards for nurses. That's why they rejected it. But the Unison healthcare workers, include ambulance crews and others, went along and they accepted it. But the RCN, never taken a national strike like this before, but some of its nurses have just got the bit between the teeth now, and they're sick of watching their living standards being cut. So it's going to get really messy this when the unions go in separate directions.
It's going to get a bit sticky, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting. I think if you ask the average member of the public who the health secretary was, they would say, is it that fat woman? Is it Jeremy Hunt? No, I can't remember.
I think Bartley's lucky. Actually, the more people don't know who he is. He's not had a good time on it, does it?
He'd get a lot more criticism probably. Yeah. What do you think, everybody, about the mega strike? Do you think this is a sensible thing for the nurses to do? Do you support what they're doing, or do you think this has gone a step too far? As we were saying, Kevin says that they've had this 5% pay offer, which was rejected last week. And I explained in my column on Friday that in 2008, a nurse's basic pay would be enough to pay for about 26 cans of Heinz baked beans. But today, thanks to the rising cost of beans and the below inflation pay rises they've had ever since 2008, that would buy their basic pay will get just 7 cans of beans an hour. 26 down to 7. And the pay rise equates to about a third of a can of beans. Sorry, Kev.
Yeah, no, Foxy, all those figures you say, people can work it out. There's Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, again today saying we've got to have we've got to embrace maths, get rid of this so-called anti-maths culture. That there isn't a problem with people doing the maths. They can see the value of their wages are falling. They can see the impact of high inflation. They can calculate what is happening to their living standards. There's not a problem with maths in the country. There's a problem with Rishi Sunak and Stephen Bartley and a Conservative UK government that is making a pretty bad job of just about everything it touches.
No, not doing their own maths very well. Leslie says, I'm getting endless Conservative clones attempting to blame the NHS crisis on doctors and nurses. Will you be correcting this? I don't know if you mean in the comments, Leslie, or if generally in life or on Facebook. But for the avoidance of doubt, all right, anyone who runs an account, which may even be fake or clone, can see these videos. So they can come on here and comment. But they are usually fairly easy to spot. But for the avoidance of any doubt, all right, the nurses and doctors strikes are not causing the chaos in the NHS. What's causing the chaos in the NHS is that there are 10% of jobs empty. And that's why the nurses and doctors are on strike, among other reasons, which is that they just cannot keep doing the job of people that aren't there, as well as their own, for less and less money every year. It's as simple as that. So although there are some cancelled appointments and operations, and everybody wishes there weren't as a result of the strikes, it would be pretty bad even if they weren't striking. There would still be a backlog. There would still be cancelled appointments and operations. It would still be crap, right? So any clones out there trying to tell everybody that it's the nurses causing the problem, that's not how it works. Now, the government is saying that they can't afford to pay them anymore, and it would feed inflation to do this. Lady says there, you can bank on Barclay hiding away. He's useless. But at the bottom of the page on there, Kevin, it's reported we're apparently spending £1 million a day on private ambulances because we don't have enough of our own. There's enough money when it comes to covering up the government's failures, isn't there? They can find the cash for that, but just not for paying the nurses to actually not be a failure in the first place.
Yeah, all that cash on private ambulances is the cost of failing to run a proper ambulance service. And then it becomes, the cuts are a false economy because you have to then pay more to private contractors who will want to make a profit on top of whatever you pay them to supply that transport. No, it's lunacy. But the problems in the NHS are deep-seated. The last Labour government rescued the NHS. It trebled the cash in it, waiting lists plummeted, response times improved, wait for A&E went right down. And then you had a Conservative government in 2010, David Cameron as the Prime Minister, George Osborne as Chancellor, and Jeremy Hunt, who's now the Chancellor, Health Secretary much of the time. And they imposed the tightest financial straitjacket on the NHS, and it's in its history, the tightest since 1948. The spending increases were so minor, they were less than in the Tory era of Margaret Thatcher, to give you some idea of how bad it was. And we're seeing the problems now. Yeah, extra cash is going into the NHS, but if you look at it on overall spending of the economy, we're still low by major European standards, and there aren't enough beds, there aren't enough doctors, and aren't enough nurses, there aren't enough other workers. And as you say, there is a real recruitment and retention crisis. They need a workforce plan to get the NHS into a better place. And yes, that will require spending some money, but let's see it as investment, because if people are healthier, they will work, they will produce incomes, they will pay more tax. And it's not just morally right, it will be good for the economy. But they're very penny pinching this government. They're without a vision, and the NHS is suffering because of a legacy of 13 years of what's largely been neglect and abuse.
And Andrew says, how about they deal with a huge amount of fraud going on in the NHS, or stop wasting money? The NHS isn't underfunded, it's mismanaged and full of theft. There is obviously mismanagement in every large organisation, Andrea, and there's obviously going to be fraud and everything else. It is not a patch in the NHS on the money that is missing from the system. They're not a patch. And if they're not going to tackle, I would suggest, the fraud, which means people can pay their taxes offshore, and they're not going to tackle the many, many billions of pounds worth of COVID fraud, which they're just writing off and letting it happen. They're not going to tackle a few million. Yes, they're not going to give a damn, I'm afraid, Andrea. So there are other more important ways to get more money back. And I wish people would stop talking about the cost of the NHS and start talking a little bit as well about the profits that we get from the NHS. We get a lot of profits from some of our developments, medical developments in science, technology, and so on. But more than anything else, right, if you want to look at things purely in terms of profit and loss, then the NHS existing saves the lives of millions of cash generating units, all right? All those human beings who are born safely, who get to raise their own children, who get to live longer lives because they are screened for things. All those people are money, 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 money to the government, all right? It's not just cash going out of the system. Cash comes back in as a result of the NHS. Don't forget it, anybody. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the whole situation? There's one thing we ought to discuss before we move on to the main story, which is that right on the right-hand side of the page there is Greg Hands, the Tory chairman, is predicting, Kevin, they're going to lose 1,000 seats in the upcoming local elections, which may be perhaps why the government is just going to have to find a way to fix this. They can't win against the nurses, can they?
Yeah, and he certainly doesn't think they're going to lose 1,000 seats. He thinks they're going to lose fewer. So he goes public on 1,000, and then he claims, "Oh, look, we've done better than we expected" on Thursday before the coronation. When, fortunately for the government, they will hope public attention will quickly shift onto Charles the Unwanted crowning in Westminster Abbey. But no, the Tories are having a bad time. They're still way behind Labour in the polls. They're under threat in their blue wall in the south from Lib Dems nibbling away too. So there will be in a bad time, and real votes in those elections in England, in most of England, not all of England, or much of England anyway, will show that Sunak and the Tories have got a big problem. But now Greg Hands was just doing the usual expectation management. Labour used to do it too. They'll probably do it in this campaign. They'll underestimate what they think they will gain, while the Tories overestimate what they think they will lose.
Okay, all right. Well, and don't forget, everybody, the local elections, which don't get big turnouts, but they really should be getting big turnouts, because they're the elections that determine how often your bins get collected, what your council tax is, whether the street lights work or not, whether the police are there when you need them to be. Those are what your local elections are for, how your schools are run. And you will now need official ID in order to vote. If you do not have either postal voting or you intend to go to a ballot station, you have to have a driving license, a passport, or another form of photo ID. If you do not have it, you have time to go and get it yet. So Google it, have a hunt for it, find a way to get the declaration, and help people that you know who might want to vote at the polling station. Get them to get their photo ID as well, and make sure they have it with them when they go. Because if you don't have your passport with you when you turn up and they say you've got to have your passport, I'll go home and get it, and then something else happens and you forget entirely to vote, which is why they have done it. All right. Make sure you take your photo ID to the polling station. Now, to the main story of the day, which is an investigation into vapes being sold illegally to children. Now, we've all seen it. Coming home from the train or off the bus stop at school or something, they're puffing away on something that smells like a toilet duct that's been set on fire. But here is evidence that shop after shop after shop sold a 13-year-old vapes that she should never have got, even vapes that adults shouldn't be able to smoke either because they're illegal. Kevin, take us through this. What exactly did they uncover and how bad is it?
Yeah, this is a fantastic bit of public interest journalism by Nick Summerlad, our colleague. And this 13-year-old was going undercover, just going as a 13-year-old into shops, and half the shops she visited sold her vapes. You've got to be 18 and over to buy them. So that's the first offence in these shops. And the second is there are legal controls on the amount of nicotine in vapes. And she was sold liquids that were up to 5 times above that legal limit. So I think it just shows you there is widespread law breaking here. And of course, there are widespread concerns too on the health impact of nicotine in vaping. If you're smoking, it's better to vape. But if you don't smoke, don't vape. But it's people are cashing in. Retailers are, the vape industry itself, the tobacco industry, which is moving into vapes. And this is a ticking time bomb for kids who are being hooked. And these figures, I mean, it's astonishing. You know, roughly half the shops in Manchester sold them. There's about 7% of 11 to 17-year-olds are now current users of vapes. I mean, that's an alarming figure.
That's astonishing, yeah. And it got to be said as well, one of the shops did actually stop her and say, have you got ID, proof of being over 18, please? And she said, oh, I've left it at home. And they said, all right then, and sold it to her anyway.
I know. Well, you know,
well done for asking for ID.
Being as charitable as I can and usually am, like shops are under pressure, but nevertheless, this is breaking the law and selling something that is harmful. And we don't know quite the full impact of it, but it's harmful. Nicotine is addictive and not good for you. To kids, it's just wrong. But the trading standards departments and local authorities are being hammered by cuts. We've been talking about what's happened to the health service. Blimey. Local authorities have taken a chicken and a half.
These shops should have been facing a £2,500 fine for selling this, and they should have been so worried about that fine that therefore they were not going to do it. They're going to be more careful. That's the purpose of the fine. But like you say, trading standards don't come round, and the police certainly don't come round. That's what the law is supposed to say. Now, it is illegal to sell vapes to children if they have no nicotine in them. Why would you want to sell a nicotine-free vape to a child, perhaps to get them used to smoking the horrible, stinky thing so that they buy the nicotine version?
Yeah, it reminds me, Foxy, of when I was a kid. They used to sell candy cigarettes. You could get white candy cigarettes with a little red end, which was supposed to be lighted, and kids were encouraged. I was bought them when I was young, sort of kind of innocent, naive days, and kids would suck them like that. And I suppose that's what they're doing with vapes without the nicotine in. Hook them young. The Jesuits knew how to do it, and it looks like tobacco companies and the vaping industry certainly knows how to get kids when they're young, and you'll have them for life, is the theory.
Yeah, children are going to want to do whatever they see the grown-ups doing. So if the grown-ups are being encouraged to vape as it's better than smoking, then the children see it and they pick it up. So you obviously were sport when you were a child, Kevin, because what we used to do when we were smoking pretend cigarettes, we had little bits of paper and rolled them up and put talcum powder in it and stood in the cloakrooms and went, which isn't quite to say. It just made people sneeze. Anyway, that's the levels we were reduced to. Chelsea says there are kids in Cumbria using vapes as young as 10 years old. It's disgusting, and the parents are allowing it because of this message, I suppose, Kevin, the health messaging that it is healthier. Yeah, somehow that goes in as almost like it's not harmful, and it's because it's not like a cigarette. But nicotine is a pesticide. It kills animals, it kills bees. It's so harmful. They're not supposed to buy cigarettes until they're old enough to be addicted already, and stop doing things that they know aren't sensible.
Well, there's an official public health program to get people off cigarettes and tobacco onto vapes, to actually assist them to do that, because most smokers, it's fewer than 1 in 5 people smoke now. It's been a huge public health success of banning smoking in so many public places, putting up the price. It's been a huge success in decreasing the numbers, but still, there's nearly 1 in 5 of us every day trying to kill ourselves with tobacco. But there is a program to get them onto vapes. Now, vapes used that way can help because they aren't as risky But there is a risk, and it's now this attempt to hook people on vaping who would never smoke cigarettes. And this is where you can see how we live and health responses, how they evolve over time. But quite clear, getting kids is unlawful. And I can't imagine any of these shops, or very few of these shops, would sell cigarettes or booze to kids now without checking their ID and wanting proof of age. I know it still happens, but I think it's been stamped out. It's been stamped out because trading standards departments in the past have come down heavy on them. I think they'll have to start doing this on vapes, and they'll have to get their own mystery shoppers, their own kids, go in. If those shops then sell them vapes, selling them illegally, they'll have to deal with it. Maybe it's a warning the first time round, or maybe it's straight to court and a fine.
Yeah, they've got to come down a bit heavier on it, you'd have thought, and obviously do some science to prove exactly what exactly is happening inside your body when you inhale these things. And Lazy says, how regulated are these vapes? I dread to think what chemicals go into them. From the smell, Lazy, it's mostly toilet duck, as I can imagine. But then again, cigarettes smell like the back end of a lorry's exhaust, and people still smoke those, don't they? Now, these things, like we've said, are supported by the NHS as an aid to stop smoking, but they've still got this nicotine. And I can remember a few years ago, Kevin, seeing reports saying, oh, the tobacco companies have moved into doing this thing called vaping, which apparently is so much better, but there's still some health concerns. And I expect if it's, the big tobacco companies that are behind the whole thing, then maybe, they don't really have human health really as a record of having human health as their main driver, shall we say. They're not known for their enthusiasm for keeping us alive, are they? And all these vapes, they require batteries with trace elements that have to be mined from the earth, and most of which are non-recyclable. They've got non-recyclable canisters and containers that get dumped. They pollute the environment. You'd think your average, is it Generation Z, your Greta Thunberg type, your snowflake, your teenager right now would be very, very anti these things. But it's really amazing what an addiction can convince people to overcome, isn't it, Kevin?
Oh, well, yeah, nicotine is incredibly addictive. I do have sympathy for people who are trying to kick the habit, and they need a bit of understanding and a bit of help. I reserve my abuse for the industry that's trying to trap them in the first place and keep them as customers. But I think we can, Generation Z, whatever you want to call it, I think we can overstate the whole range of people's attitude to being fitter and clean living, as you put it. I think there are still a lot of people having chips and crisps and drinking too much.
Well, when you're 17, that's absolutely, it is a health food, isn't it? It's probably the closest you get to a vegetable most of the time. I certainly lived on. Yeah,
well, I've got to warn you that tomato crisps are not one of your 5 a day. They won't qualify. But no, look. And we
so that should be vitamin D, right?
Yeah, we all have weaknesses, don't we? You just need some help. I mean, that's what it is. And restricting tobacco, which kills, I think, prematurely 80,000 people a year in Britain. 80,000 people go to an early grave or crematorium because of tobacco. Now that's down quite considerably for a few years ago. It was over 100,000. But nevertheless, vapes itself is not a clean, healthy alternative, and the medical effects aren't fully known. But it's got to be negative when nicotine isn't good for you.
No, we do know that nicotine can kill in high doses. It's particularly bad for small children. And there are other governments around the world which warn against the using of it, unlike ours. And of course, if you're pregnant and you're vaping, then nicotine can do serious damage to the fetus. So it's really not recommended. And it's also, what was I going to say? I was going to put something out there and my mind's gone completely blank. It's been a very long Easter holiday, everybody. So nicotine is bad for you. It's bad for your fetus. Please don't smoke it. And obviously need someone to crack down on this and stop them being sold to children, because it's a very bad thing. Added to which, of course, you walk around smelling like you're smoking an air freshener. It's just not cool. Try using talcum powder instead. Works a treat. Now, thank you everybody for those. Get into the comments and ask us if you've got any more questions. Do you vape? Have you found it better? Is it a better way of giving up smoking, or are you still actually addicted to vaping and it hasn't really changed anything? I know someone once who tried to get off smoking by using nicotine patches and just ended up being more addicted to nicotine because he put the patch on every 5 seconds, and then when he went back to smoking again, smoked more than he did before to start with. Anyway. It's all to do with tobacco. It only took us 500 years to figure out tobacco is bad and start smoking less of it. Maybe we'll manage to figure that out with vaping a bit quicker. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Anyway, thank you for that, Kevin. Thank you, everyone. We need to move on now because there is some good news in the world. We found it for you, and this is really good. Here it is. Now, this is possibly the best animal story of the year so far, all right? Every word of this, I started laughing, and I laughed again with the next sentence. I laughed more the more it went on. So an emu, that's already funny, called Rodney, right, triggered a 5-hour police search. He went on the run like Raoul Moat after he fled his pen in Suffolk. He was being looked after, of all things, by a pet sitter. Apparently emus need them. But he got frightened in a storm and burst through his fence. So the police were called, the RSPCA were called, the RSPB were called, and his owners even came back off holiday. They spent 5 hours searching for Rodney. His owners came back, as I said. They eventually found him a mile away. And when he saw his owner, Rodney, who is 6 foot tall, his owner says he came over and let me put my arms around his neck and give him a cuddle. Oh. Now, Rodney is now staying with another female emu down the road. Apparently, Suffolk is full of them while they repair his fences. So, Kevin, is this proof that even a spindly 6-footer called Rodney can find a way to shuck up with a bird in the end?
I know. He's come up trumps, hasn't he? He's won. He's got his bird. It's very old school language, but I like the fact the owner enticed him over to the car with food, which is what you would do with a dog or a cat or a budgie if they went missing. Goldfish would be a bit different, but yeah.
I don't know what emus eat. It was Grotbag's face every time I ever saw an emu eat anything. So a seed of some sort. That's Roadrunner, isn't it?
I tell you, if I bumped into that emu, it can eat whatever it wants if I've got it. I'm not going to tackle.
What if it was called Rodney and he wanted a cuddle? If all he wanted from you was a cuddle, Kevin, would you be able to do it?
God, you'd be terrified, wouldn't you? You'd look at that beak and you'd think it's going to have your eye out. Quite nice, but yeah, I mean, it's presumably quite harmful. I'm sure it's well looked after, isn't it? So
yes, exactly.
It's not the Grand National.
He's got his bird in the end, which I suppose is the important bit. But I just watch out for Suffolk, Kevin, because it's full of the damn things.
Yeah,
they're everywhere. So anyway, thank you for that. Thank you everyone for taking part. We'll have to sort of see how things go with the nurses' mega strike, which is coming, I think, at the end of the month. Then the nurses are going to have to reballot for any strike action because their existing ballot, the mandate has run out. So if they do anything else after that, they've got to reballot again. And there's also a meeting at the beginning of May, the NHS Staff Council, where the unions will all get together and decide if they're going to accept the sort of the genuine pay offers that they've received from the government or not, which may change everything all over again. And in the meantime, I dare say the health secretary, who apparently is called Steve Barclay, but no one knows what he looks like or has ever seen him, was going to do absolutely nothing about vapes being sold to children. What could possibly be the long-term health consequences of feeding children pesticides? None whatsoever. Thank you, government. And we'll see you all again on Wednesday, actually, for another edition of the News Agenda. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, everybody else. See you all on Wednesday. Tatty bye.
Goodbye.